Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anupama, Professor at Department of Economics, Punjabi University, Patiala. I am going to talk about the module Urban Containment Policy from Population, Urbanization and Poverty. So students, we are going to discuss about the concepts, types and the impact of urban containment policy. Before we study urban containment, we need to analyze why any economic social control measure is necessary. It is necessary because its counterpart or opposite is harmful. So by the same yardstick, urban containment is necessary because failure to do so, or say if we allow the urban sprawl, it would be pretty harmful. Urban containment aims not only at restricting out-of-town development but also in terms of in-town development. The way in which we develop a nation's landscape and its urban areas is a critical component to creating livable and sustainable cities. The footprint of major metropolitan areas, suburbs, and small towns ultimately shapes the environmental and social conditions within our communities. One type of development pattern that has received increasing attention by researchers and policymakers interested in fostering sustainable communities is called sprawl. Sprawl is generally typified as low-density, haphazard development spiraling outward from the urban centers. So, this module aims to throw light on the meaning of urban containment, the need of urban containment policy, objectives of urban containment policies, main forms of urban containment policies, impacts of urban containment policies, impacts of more stringent urban containment policies on land prices, impact of less stringent urban policies on land prices. The urban sprawl has negative impact on quality of life in many ways. The suburbs grow, more commuter traffic strains the infrastructure. Infrastructure consists of the basic facilities, services, and machinery needed for a community to function. For example, roads and bridges need maintenance. More cars on the road for more time adds to air pollution too. Also, sources of water such as rivers or underground aquifers, layers of water holding rocks or soil become depleted. Urban sprawl also has other costs. The cost of providing streets, utilities, and other public facilities to suburban communities is often at least 25% higher than for high-density residences in a city. Urban sprawl also separates classes of people. When those in upper income brackets choose to live in outlying areas, lower income residents often become isolated in inner city areas. In this context, the social scientists have argued that sprawling urban and suburban development patterns are creating negative impacts including habitat fragmentation, water and air pollution, increased infrastructure costs, inequality, and social homogeneity, and this is what urban containment measures aim to restrict. Now let us look at the meaning of urban containment. The Dictionary of Geography defines urban containment as the policy of limiting sprawl by restricting out of the town development. While this is a simple definition, it is true that urban containment aims to limit sprawl, and that it does so by restricting development outside of a designated zone. But a slightly broader view is necessary in order to include the aims of the urban containment in terms of in-town development as well. Thus, urban containment is an attempt to confront the reasonable development needs of the community, region, or state and accommodate them in a manner that preserves public goods, minimizes fiscal burdens, minimizes adverse interactions between land uses while maximizing positive ones, improves the equitable distribution of land, etc. for sustainable living. It is very important to discuss here the objectives of urban containment policies. As we have already discussed, urban containment measures aim to limit out-of-town development and also in terms of in-town development. And what exactly does it aim to achieve and control through these policies? As its name implies, urban containment aims to contain the outward expansion of the urban areas into the countryside beyond a line or boundary. It does so in part by choreographing public infrastructure investment, land use and development regulation, and incentives and disincentives to influence the rate, timing, intensity, mix, and location of growth. Broadly speaking, urban containment programs can be distinguished from traditional approaches to land use regulation by the presence of policies that are explicitly designed to limit the development of land outside a defined urban area while encouraging infill development and redevelopment inside the urban area. In this perspective, the main objective of urban containment can be observed from Figure 1. The figure shows that the urban containment policy aims at achieving the goal of urban development along with equity as well as efficiency. This type of development should also be protecting the environment. Protecting public and merit goods. Basic objective of the urban containment policies is to protect the public and merit goods such as clean air, rivers, agricultural areas, and forest land that must be preserved for the future. If the growth of urban areas goes unhindered, it would be gulping up the agricultural land and forest, leading to fewer livelihood opportunities for the persons depending upon the primary sector. The fall in these areas also poses danger to the sustainable living of the humanity as a whole. The market considers short-term benefits only, and that too in private terms. But a macro-level policy of urban containment is concerned with social returns and long-term costs and benefits. Therefore, urban containment attempts to preserve land spaces which provide public and merit goods in long time. Accommodating development needs. One should not get an idea that urban containment is a policy that restricts the scope of the urban economy by controlling the market forces to function beyond certain geographic limits. It actually intervenes in the market in an attempt to consider all the development needs of an urban area, including public facilities, business, and housing. It does this by containing development and by managing development. It attempts to provide facilities at low cost and with equitable burdens for an area's residents. Compact development brings more cost-efficient facilities and services than sprawling development does. Ensuring equity. With urban containment, it is generally blamed that the price of land increases and the availability reduces. making the housing less affordable, especially for lower income groups. Therefore, the in-town containment policies try to balance the distribution of land among low-income housing, major shopping centers, and sports arenas in order to reduce the inequalities in the city. Ensuring efficiency. No urban containment policy is successful to control the urban sprawl and its ill effects if it is not efficient in framing and implementing the policies that take due care of the citizens as well as the markets. Urban containment programs strive to understand the economic, housing, and public works needs of an urban area in order to accommodate those needs and anticipate the growth of the area. Effective urban containment must make long-term development easier to predict and manage for the results desired by the community, or it will inevitably break down. Moreover, for speedier implementation or say the quicker response to the changing needs of the city, there must be coordination between city, state, and federal bodies and their efforts. Thus, an effective urban containment policy aims at accommodating long-range urban population growth requirements consistent with state and local goals and policies, fulfilling the local needs for housing as well as employment opportunities, providing public facilities and services, maximizing efficiency for land uses in or at the fringes of existing urban areas, considering all environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences, and above all, preserving natural resources. Now we can discuss main forms of urban containment policy. In literature on urban policies, we can identify three major forms of urban containment. These are broadly urban growth boundaries and urban service area or urban service boundaries. It also includes a protected and adequate green belt so that unnecessary sprawl of the urban areas does not lead to unsustainable growth of the city and its economy. Before we describe each of these policies separately, it is important to have an overview of the comparative scope of these policies. These are shown in Figure 3. The figure shows that with a green belt policy, there will be no development within the specified green area. The policy of urban growth boundary states that there will be no growth beyond the specified city limits. Similarly, we can see that a policy of urban service area restricts the provision of urban services within the specified city limits. The figure 3 actually gives a brief definition of each of the policy form under the broader network of urban containment policies. Green belts. Among all the three mentioned main forms of urban containment policies, green belts are considered the most restrictive forms. Green belts are the instruments used for preservation of agricultural land and undeveloped land. A green belt is a strip of land that surrounds or is adjacent to the urban area, and it is protected from development and manufacturing. The land which is located within the green belt can be used for farming or for construction of urban wetlands. Green belts are typically established through mandate in the form of a city plan, restrictive covenant, or land use designation. Green belts have been used more extensively in large cities throughout Europe and Asia than in the United States. In the late 1930s, London was the first major city that introduced a green belt system, which was also adopted by several other European cities such as Berlin, Vienna, Barcelona, and Budapest. But we can also find equal number of critics of this type of urban containment policy, as they believe that the green belts may encourage urban sprawl rather than prevent it by forcing people to build out of the green belt, farther away from the city, thereby urban sprawl. Pendle and others describe green belts as the tightest containment strategy because green belts are primarily used for the permanent protection of open space and natural resources. Change in boundaries is uncommon even under high development pressures. Green belts form a band of protected and natural and fragile lands. These policies are thus called the tightest urban containment policies, as the change in the prescribed boundaries is quite uncommon. Urban growth boundaries. The second form of containment policies is urban growth boundary or UGB, which is not a physical space as green belts. It is a line drawn around an urban area in order to separate the urban area from the surroundings, that is, the rural areas. As shown in figure 3, the area inside the boundary is zoned for urban use, while the areas which are outside the boundary are zoned for rural use. Zoning is used for implementation of urban growth boundary. In contrast to green belts, urban growth boundaries are not intended to be permanent. Unlike green belts, an urban growth boundary is reassessed and extended if is needed in order to accommodate the expected growth. Although the implementation of urban growth boundary is easy, there is a great potential for its misuse as well. More specifically, if the sources of market failure are not examined carefully, the policymakers cannot estimate the exact extent of urban overexpansion. Therefore, a urban growth boundary may be too strict, restricting the city's size without reason and leading to no appropriate increase in housing cost and unmanageable and unjustifiable increases in density. The third form is that of urban service area or urban service boundary. Urban service boundaries are more flexible than urban growth boundaries. An urban service boundary is defined as an area beyond which no city services such as sewer lines and water lines can be extended. The urban service areas or urban service boundaries are also periodically reviewed by the local governments. In fact, urban development is not prohibited beyond urban service areas, but developers are burdened with the cost of development, including infrastructure and services. Now we can discuss the main impacts of urban containment policies. The urban containment policies may have both the positive and negative effects. An overview of these effects is shown in box 1. The box shows that the foremost positive impact of urban containment policies is to preserve the farmland which is vulnerable to urban growth, especially when the industrial and housing projects spread to the outer boundaries of the urban areas where land is relatively cheaper. These policies aim at minimizing the use of land by increasing residential densities through cost-efficient constructions in the given areas. These policies clearly separate urban areas from the rural ones to ensure the orderly transition from rural to urban land use. Moreover, these policies promote a sense of unified community and reduce the social disruption due to urban sprawl. High density and compact developments resulting from urban containment policies may help people communicate with their neighbors more frequently. On the other hand, the negative impacts of urban containment policies include the increase in housing prices and other socio-economic effects. The urban containment policies generally lead to increase in land prices within the urban boundaries and reduce it for the lands beyond those boundaries, leading to inequalities in property values and lopsided development. This further accentuates the socio-economic inequalities among the rural and urban residents. The scarcity of land within the boundary may lead to fewer alternatives of preferred housing, starting new businesses, establishing new industries, etc. The growth of urban population always poses a threat to the existing open spaces and spare land for recreation activities, as they may be converted into urban uses with increase in demand for urban housing. Thus, in relation to the negative impacts, it is generally viewed that the imposition of the stringent policies may reduce the welfare of urban citizens, as it leads to rise in the housing prices and cut housing consumption while maintaining the incomes of the absentee landlords. More stringent policies in this regard may result into greater welfare losses. Now we can discuss about these impacts. Actually, this analysis is based upon the works of Enas, who had discussed the impact of supply and demand for land upon the land prices under various forms of urban containment policies. Land housing prices under more stringent urban containment policies, that is green belts and urban growth boundaries. As a result of stringent urban containment policies, the housing prices and costs increase and the land consumers stand to lose. This is illustrated in figure 4, where the horizontal axis represent the amount of land available for development and the vertical axis land values. The curves S and D are the land supply and demand curves respectively. Without enforcement of urban growth boundaries and or the green belts, equilibrium occurs at point I. The triangle ACI represents the consumer surplus and the triangle CDI is the producer's or landowner's surplus. When the urban growth boundary or the green belts are enforced, the available land is fixed at Q and the supply is represented by vertical curve S dash. Since the available land is restricted, its price increases from C to B. As a result, the loss to land consumers located inside the urban growth boundary is measured by BCEF, and the loss to those outside the urban growth boundary or green belt is triangle EFI. Similarly, the gains of landowners inside the urban growth boundary due to the higher price are measured by the area BCEF, which represents the transfer of benefits from consumers to landowners. The competition for the limited amount of land bids up its price so that sellers gain and buyers lose. On the other hand, landowners located outside the urban growth boundary or green belts lose the opportunity to sell the land, and triangle FQI represent their loss. The supply curve can be interpreted as the marginal private cost curve or MPC, and the marginal social cost curve, that is MSC, is the sum of marginal private cost and the externalities. If a urban growth boundary is properly designed, the shaded area triangle EHI can then be interpreted as the external cost occurring when too much land is developed through sprawl. With enforcement of the urban growth boundaries and green belts, this area becomes a gain for society by curbing sprawl and preserving outer open spaces. As long as urban growth boundaries or green belts are designed below the competitive equilibrium, only existing landowners inside the boundary gain. Amenities generated by preserving outer areas can somewhat offset the losses of land consumers and landowners outside the urban growth boundary or green belts, depending upon how much they are willing to pay for amenities. Assuming that housing price is proportionate to land price and that housing price weighs heavily for consumers, the enforcement of urban growth boundaries could discourage the influx of population into contained areas. Thus, when urban growth boundaries or the green belts are enforced, population growth could be sensitive to housing prices and vice versa. Nevertheless, if population grows more in UGB cities than in uncontained cities, this means that UGBs and the green belts successfully accommodate new growth within the growth boundaries. Now let us discuss about land housing prices under less stringent urban containment policies, that is, the policies related with urban service areas or boundaries. As we have already discussed, that there is no restriction on growth of urban areas beyond a given boundary, which is actually a limit of the provision of urban services. If the developers or even the individual residents decide to build houses beyond these limits, they have to bear the cost of provision of these facilities. These services are available at a cheaper rate inside the predefined boundaries and are costly outside the boundaries. As a result, the demand for land development increases inside urban service areas or boundaries and decreases beyond these areas or boundaries. This is illustrated in Figure 5. Inside the service boundary, the consumer surplus changes from ADB to EGF. Both a gain EAHF and a loss GDBH are associated with this change. The net benefit, that is EAHF minus GDBH, is positive because the gain is bigger. The losses are the foregone benefits from having a lower price, and the gain is derived from having more land developed despite a higher price. Outside the service boundary, land consumers are losers. This is the reverse of what happens to consumers inside the boundary. The land consumer surplus changes from E-G-F- to A-D-B-. This is a loss associated with the reduction in the amount of land available at equilibrium. The loss is represented by E-A-H-F-, although there is a gain of G-D-B-H- because the equilibrium price is lower. The gains are smaller and the land consumers are net losers. The landowners outside urban service areas or the boundaries are also losers because of the reduced demand for their land. However, the landowners inside urban service areas or boundaries enjoy a gain measured by GDBF. So students, let us summarize what we have learned from this module. We have observed that the urban containment policies aim at protecting the environment, optimizing the gains of growth, and ensuring justifiable distribution while protecting the rights of those living beyond urban areas. Green belts, urban growth boundaries, and urban service boundaries are the three main forms of urban containment policies. Out of these, the urban growth boundaries and the green belts are considered to be more stringent, while the urban service areas are considered to be less stringent. The urban containment policies have several positive and negative effects. Among these effects, the change in land prices is one of the most important effects of urban containment policies, which increases the land prices within the boundaries and reduces it beyond the boundaries. While the cost of urban services is lower within the boundaries and higher beyond the boundaries, leading to many welfare losses. However, on the positive side, the containment policies lead to protection of environment and the interest of those living in non-urban areas. The central strengths of urban containment are its capacity to promote compact development, efficient service delivery, and preserve open space. By using urban containment techniques, urban areas can provide controls for gradual and manageable development and growth and ensure an appropriate type, mix, and size of development for a particular urban area. That's all with today's lecture. I hope you must have enjoyed it. Thank you.